It's not every day that a truly all-new ute model comes along. With the life cycle for most utes being closer to a decade, where it's more like a handful of years for the average passenger car, it makes it all the more important when one does, because you know it's going to be around for quite some time. And that is indeed the case with this, the all-new 2021 Isuzu D-Max. Made all the more important by the fact it's also going to form the basis for the new Mazda BT50. With the introduction of this new D-Max, Isuzu looks to take the model from one of the oldest and most basic models in the entire class and turn it into the newest and most advanced by making it more refined than ever before and by packing in some technology that no ute has yet featured. And it's not without good reason that Isuzu's packing all these sorts of features into something like the D-Max either, because you see, with most Australian families moving away from sedans and wagons, and not just into SUVs but also utes as family vehicles, it needs to be safer and much nicer to live with for family buyers, while also still appealing to its traditional customer base, looking for a solid, rugged and reliable one-ton ute with incredible capability. So, have they pulled off blending the two?
Just looking over the spec tables for this new model, it certainly appears that there's a variant to suit all buyers in this new range, with the tradie-focused SX, adventure-seeker-focused LSM, and the LS-U on test here, which is aimed more at families and caravanners, all carrying over from the old lineup, while the old LST range topper has now been replaced by the visually toughened up X-Terrain. It makes sense that the LS-U here is aimed more at family buyers, as while the SX and LSM feature hose-out vinyl flooring, this features carpet along with nicer cloth upholstery and upgrades like dual zone climate control and powered lumbar support for the driver. Across all models though, you get a vastly redesigned cabin that features nicer materials on key contact points and more hard-wearing and easy to clean ones where otherwise required. More impressive though is the standard kit you get across the range, as it's truly class-leading. Although my LS-U tester and the X-Terrain feature a larger 9-inch infotainment screen with sat-nav, the SX and LSM only get a 7-inch display that goes without it, but that doesn't really matter as all variants pack wireless Apple CarPlay along with wired Android Auto and digital radio, although a wireless phone charger is one notable omission. Even more impressive than that though is the active safety tech that it features. Run off a dual camera module at the top of the windscreen, the Intelligent Driver Assist System, or IDAS for short, gives this thing class-leading levels of safety tech, including features like autonomous emergency braking, turn assist, lane departure warning and prevention, adaptive cruise control, and blind spot monitoring on all models, along with a lane centering system on automatic versions. This, plus passive safety tech like a class-first centre airbag, makes it far safer for everyone, but in particular family buyers. But with the changes going far deeper than just added tech and interior niceties, with it now sat on a more rigid chassis with a redesigned engine, tweaked 6-speed manual and automatic transmissions, and overhauled suspension both front and rear, it's on the road that some of the biggest changes are felt.
The moment you get behind the wheel, you realise just how much of a difference these interior refinements have made. Compared to the old model, where you used to feel like you were sitting on top of the thing more than in it, in this you definitely do feel like you're really locked into the thing. The driving position is absolutely fantastic. You sit nice and low, surrounded by the interior. You don't feel like you're perched up on top of the thing anymore. And the seat itself is absolutely fantastic. The shoulder bolstering on it and the side bolstering means you feel really nicely held in. It's incredibly comfortable. I like the steering wheel positioning and size as well. It feels like a really nice size, the leather on it's great, and it now has tilt and telescopic adjustments, so I can finally get properly comfortable in this thing as someone who's quite tall but has short T-Rex arms. The other thing you notice as well is just how much all the NVH reduction measures have added up in here. I mean, the most notable one, of course, is the engine noise reduction. In the old model with the 4JJ1 3-litre engine, it really did make quite a racket when you put your foot into it, or even when you were just cruising along, quite frankly. It was clattery and you heard the injectors ticking away and everything like that, and it did get a bit tiresome. Now, with this new 4JJ3 engine, it's a completely different ball game. I mean, right now I'm just sort of gently applying the throttle and you're barely hearing anything. Now, of course, when you do get onto it a bit, it does start to get vocal, but nowhere near the level the old engine did. It still sounds muted at the end of the day, and what you're hearing is more of a muscular sound than an agricultural one. Let's talk about this engine a bit more, by the way. It's a 3-litre 4-cylinder turbo diesel, and it's absolutely fantastic. Now, we've got 140 kilowatts and 450 newton meters on tap here, but those peak outputs are not really what matters so much with a big diesel ute like this. What really matters is usable torque, how much twisting force you've got, how much of the time. And in this, you've got plenty of it across a really nice wide spread. You've got 300 of those 450 newton meters on tap from 1000 RPM and 400 of them across a wide spread from 1400 to over 3000 RPM. So you really have a lot of torque a lot of the time. Now, that peak 450 newton meters comes in the middle of that 400 spread at around about 2000, and that's a good place for it to be as well, because that's sort of where you're going to be hovering around when you're at high speeds on the open road. And when you're towing something like a caravan or a horse float or whatever, as a lot of Isuzu owners do, that of course really matters. Now, let's talk about steering, because this is one of the biggest changes this new model has received, is it's gone from hydraulic power steering to electric power steering. Now, that's a necessary change in order to allow all of that new active safety technology, things like the lane centering and lane keep assist, turn assist, those sorts of things. To allow them to work, you need to have electric power steering. And for as much as I love the feeling of hydraulic power steering, I'm more than happy to make the trade-off for an electric rack so that you get all of those features. Now, it feels undoubtedly artificial. There's no mistaking this for anything other than electric power steering, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. At around about 40 k's an hour, those sort of round town speeds, it does feel a tad slow on centre, so it still feels like ute steering in that way, I suppose. But either side of that 40k mark, it's really well tuned. For low speed applications, so both in car parks and also while off-roading, it is single finger light. You really don't have to work hard at all to turn the wheel, and it just makes it far more pleasant day to day, and also a lot easier when you're off-road. But at speeds like I'm at now on the open road, it feels nice and wonderfully progressive through these sweeping bends. The handling characteristics of this thing are pretty great as well. So it's a fairly conventional ute setup. Ladder frame chassis, double wishbone suspension up front, and a live axle with leaf springs in the back. Now, up front, they have changed the upper A-arm position so that it's mounted a bit higher, and as a result, it helps this thing feel really nice and stable through the corners. It never seems to wobble around too much or anything like that. It just has fantastic body control, and other than a hint of top heaviness, I guess, which is kind of inherent from a tall vehicle like this, it's really nice. Now, in the back, it has a 3-leaf setup, which is kind of controversial, only having 3 leaves in each leaf spring, because it is the only 1-ton ute in the class to have such a setup. Now, the reason Isuzu's gone with it is to help with ride quality, while also allowing it to maintain that 1-ton plus payload. And I'm kind of glad they have gone with the 3-leaf setup, because many utes out there, driving them unladen is pretty unpleasant. The ride is just so firm because there's nothing to dampen it back there. In this, unladen, the ride quality is really very good. I mean, yes, there's a hint of initial firmness when you hit big bumps, but for the most part, it feels pretty pleasant. Now, I did manage to get a couple 100 kilos in the back of this during the course of the week. Nothing too crazy, obviously, but even just that small amount did help take that edge off of it, that tiny bit of initial firmness, and just give it that extra bit of damping that it needs. But as I said, even without anything back there, the ride unladen is very impressive. And to be honest, just driving this thing overall is very pleasant. Between the good ride quality, great driving position, the quiet engine, and of course just the fact that the rest of the car is very quiet and pleasant as well. I mean, road noise is very well dampened down, as is wind noise, which is kind of unsurprising because one of the big marketing things they mentioned at the press launch for this thing was the fact that the aerodynamics were done in the same wind tunnel that they did the Japanese Shinkansen in, the bullet trains. And I can speak from experience and say that at 300 k's an hour, those things are dead silent inside. So no surprise then that this thing is really quiet on the open road. And I mean, through the corners, it just feels so sure-footed. Keep in mind as well that it's bucketing down with rain right now and has been all week. I've never once had any sort of scares when it comes to traction issues or anything like that. Honestly, you sort of have to pinch yourself and go, oh yeah, I'm driving a 1-ton ute. Because you do forget that. It feels positively car-like, even in horrendous conditions like this. Now, the other thing I guess we should talk about with this ute is how it performs off-road, because I've done quite a bit of off-roading with this thing as well. In fact, my first impressions with it came off-road. You see, because there wasn't a normal press launch event for this new model because of all coronavirus restrictions and everything like that at the moment, wasn't able to go into state to go and have some fun with it somewhere like that. However, because the situation's not too bad here in South Australia where I am, I was able to get along to an event out at Eagleview four-wheel drive track with the Isuzu iVenture Club. And it was there that I got to drive this for the very first time, taking it out on the tracks there. And it performed fantastically. We got to demo the new diff lock in it, which makes off-roading a piece of cake. The low-range gearing in it, found out that was really good too, and the whole four-wheel drive system, I mean, it did not struggle for traction at all. The old D-Max had a very rudimentary traction control system. This new traction control system in this one is far more advanced. You can tell that immediately. Just crawling up sort of loose hills very slowly in first gear, barely any issues with wheel spin or anything like that at all. Very impressive. The ride too out at Eagleview, because it's quite a rocky track, had no real issues, despite the fact we were running road pressures and we were on fairly useless highway terrain tyres. It did a stellar job out there. Now, I also went and had some fun in this thing out at a quarry where the staff there were kind enough to let me have free rein over the whole place and have a play around in the mud there. And again, didn't really have any traction issues either. It just feels about as planted off-road as it does on-road, which is really impressive. And even right now, as you can probably see in the background, I am at the beach. I'm at Goolwa Beach, and even on the sand, which is quite wet and soft at the moment, it's tracking quite nicely. I'm in some grooves at the moment left by another four-wheel drive, but if I move out onto my own path, perfectly fine. No issues at all. It's really competent off-road, this thing. Switching between two-wheel drive and four-wheel drive, and then high range and low range, again, it is so quick, like genuinely a matter of a couple of seconds. Normally you're expecting, you know, when you go from high range to low range especially, you're sitting there waiting for that clunk as it shifts into it. In this, you turn the dial and practically by the time you look up to check the light on the dashboard, it's already in it. So very impressive system. And overall, just a very, very impressive ute. I'm so impressed with this thing.
Combining impressive on-road comfort and handling adeptness, stress-free off-road capability, and unprecedented levels of refinement and technology for what is a basic work vehicle at heart, this new D-Max is a true class leader on just about every front. As such, this thing is the new ute to beat, and it'll be interesting to see how the features it's packing influences the next generation versions of its rivals. With Isuzu looking for a 10% share of new ute sales in Australia, if ever it could have built a vehicle capable of stealing some sales from the mainstream brands, it's this thing. Ford, Toyota, be afraid. Be very afraid.